Welcome to Veterans Forum, a program by veterans, about veterans, for veterans and their families. I'm your co-host, Bob West, with Ray Chattery and Jerry Devlin. Our goal is to provide important information on legislation, benefits, support, and activities for you and your families by interviewing leaders in our community. Tonight we have a very special program because we're going to talk about the legislative process and how it works here in Maryland. And we're very fortunate to have as our co-host Jerry Devlin, who has gone through the process and has lived it for many years. So, Jerry, thanks. You're our guest and co-host.
Well, thank you.
And this is the important legislation period for us as Maryland is meeting now through April. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are really confused, as certainly I am, about the whole legislative process, how the bills get started until the governor finally signs them into law. So can you give us a general rundown of how that would work if somebody wanted to start it on their own?
Well, any legislator, can introduce a bill on any subject. Massachusetts, for example, has an interesting provision in the state constitution. Any citizen can introduce a bill. But legislators have to introduce bills if their constituents request it. And they can't be pigeonholed. They have to have a public hearing, and they have to be voted upon by at least one house. It's called the right of private petition. And you get some really nutty bills. I went to college across the street from the State House, and there was a kid from Harvard had a bill. He said the Charles River towns where Harvard is were very prosperous, and he lived in Lowell, and the Merrimack Valley was very poor. And his solution to the problems of the Merrimack Valley was to move Harvard from Cambridge to Lowell, he said, which would not only improve the economy of the Merrimack Valley, he's able to solve my own personal commuting problem. And two deans from Harvard had to come down and oppose the bill. And you really get some humdingers there. But we don't have that. But now, for example, in the British House of Commons, a legislator doesn't have an inherent right to introduce a bill. Bills are basically only introduced by the government. And they don't have separation of powers, so cabinet members tend to be they are almost always members of the House of Commons, occasionally the House of Lords. But so the government introduces a bill, and they have once a month, they have like a lottery, and they have what they call a private member's bill, but they don't have it. So unlike Congress, where you have thousands of bills, their bills are numbered in the hundreds, and of course they're all serious, and so in Maryland, introducing a bill, any legislator can introduce a bill on virtually any subject, and under the rules of the House, you can't draft a bill yourself. I worked on Capitol Hill, and I did draft bills in the Congress, but I couldn't do it when I was a state legislator. You have to bring them over to legislative reference, and you can give them a lot of direction on it and what you want and how you want it. And it's important to know how you want a bill drafted. For example, we had a bill that I was interested in, but I really wasn't interested in what the bill purported to do. I was interested in something else. So you can amend a statute two ways. You can simply add a section to it, like you have 5 sections. You say this will be section 6, and you put the new language in. Or you can repeal and reenact the old section and then put it back in more neatly. And when you do that, you may get rid of some other stuff that you did that nobody quite knows about. And that's what they call that's what the bill they call a snake. Bill Safire, the late Bill Safire, just died, was a great word expert for the New York Times. He wrote a book on political slang, and he quoted Larry Lamont, Mary Borgers, and I on slang terms in the Maryland legislature. Mary described a bill that was called a red-headed Eskimo. This was a bill to give a subsidy for ethanol, manufacturing ethanol, but there only was one company in the state doing it. And a red-headed Eskimo, Eskimos tend not to be red-headed, a bill with a very small number of beneficiaries. And then Larry Lamont and I were quoted as the snake bills. And there's 2 basic ways you can do a snake. Larry said one of them is a simple bill that simply repeals a lot of existing law. And mine was the wordy bill that has, the health bill, 2,000 pages. But when you have a bill that's lengthy, you can hide the real meaning of the bill in what I call a forest of verbiage. But then a bill is referred. The bill comes on first reader to the House, and it's introduced by name and title, and then the Speaker refers it to one of the standing committees of the House. And because the legislature meets for only 90 days, committees are very, very powerful in Annapolis. In other words, there is a constitutional legal way you can overcome a bad vote in a committee, but it's almost never done. So if a bill doesn't pass in a committee, it's dead. And sometimes a bill will be referred to two committees and has to be approved by, for example, when I was in the legislature, I was in the Ways and Means Committee, and a bill to create a new judgeship, because it involved money, the bill would be referred to us in the Ways and Means Committee, but because it involved creating a new judgeship, it went to the Judiciary Committee, and both committees had to report favorably upon the bill. And the committees tend to be dominated by senior members. One of the things that people believe out here in television land, if anybody's watching us tonight, somehow people have a funny idea of politics, that nobody in their right mind would say, my brain is going to be operated on tomorrow, please get me the least experienced doctor you have. Or I've got a tax case, and if I lose, I'm going to jail. I'd like a lawyer who's never tried a tax case before. That's the one I want to represent me. But people think, the legislators, that anybody can be a legislator. And the most important thing I think the legislature does is kill bad bills, stupid bills. And stupid bills tend to be introduced by freshmen. And I know I've looked back on bills that I introduced when I was a freshman, and I had an unusual amount of education for a freshman legislator, and I had been in government a long time before I'd been on the governor's staff before I was in the legislature. I am embarrassed by the stupidity of the bills that I put in myself. And the bills that you don't know about, they call it the law of unanticipated consequences. When I was on the bench, I was chairman of the Judicial Legislative Committee, and I went down to Annapolis and appeared on behalf of bills that affected the judiciary. And we had a legislator introduce a bill, an anti-crime bill, anti-drug bill. And her bill, the delegate from Cecil County, would say in all drug cases you couldn't null pros them, or drop them, put them on the STET docket, the inactive docket, or plea bargain them. And she couldn't quite understand that. So you understand, if your bill passes, you have just closed the criminal courts of Maryland. You can't prosecute anybody for any crimes. The reason is, in the circuit court, you have to bring a case to trial within 6 months of arraignment, and plea bargains are measured in minutes. Trials are measured in days and weeks, and sometimes months. And like Bud Marshall had in the county, he had a policy, for example, one time that all his assistant state's attorneys, if there was a plea bargain, you had to plead to the most important charge. In other words, you couldn't reduce rape to attempted rape or murder to manslaughter or whatever. So the public defender said, no, we're not going to play that game. So we're going to have trials on every case. So by this policy went into effect on Monday, and Bud called it off on Thursday. It just isn't workable. So you do get legislators who don't understand. For example, hypothetically here in Bowie, we have a police department. If they stop you for speeding on Millstream Drive and you get convicted, that money doesn't go to Bowie. It goes into the general fund of the state. And of course, people think, why shouldn't Bowie get the money that its police department raises? Well, that seems like a good idea. But one of the great reforms of the 20th century in every state is getting rid of speed traps. A city's in a budget crisis. What do you do in a budget crisis? If you're in Bowie, put all your cops, put them out in Route 450 and Route 450. And then, of course, if Bowie does it, everyone's going to do it. How would you like to drive from here to Ocean City and go to all those towns of Vienna and Salisbury and Easton and so forth, and the speed traps? Oh, I hadn't thought of that. And some of us who were in the service, like I was in Camp Lejeune, and it was terrible. We had to drive north from Camp Lejeune through Colonial Heights, Virginia, and the speed traps, with unreasonably low speed limits, and that's all they did. But so experience is very, very important. And you do have some people on committees, and you don't appreciate what they do. They kill bad bills, and that's awfully important.